Okay, so right now we're going to talk about conflicts over interest, which is the other division of the topic of conflicts. If you remember, the first one was on conflicts over ideas. So conflicts over interest might be divided in three. It's either territorial, governmental, or economic. Let's discuss first what's territorial. Okay, so conflict over interest in the category of territorial is a type of conflict that concerns tangible goods. In other words, things that you can touch. And thus meaning that it concerns on territory. So inside the territorial conflict, you may have two: border disputes or and the control of entire states. In border disputes, these are conflicts that might arouse due to the creation of boundaries between states. This is one of the most common conflicts that exists, and it can be divided itself into irredentism, which is trying to have a territory that was lost to another state and trying to get it back because there is people with the same nation or ethnicity that your country has living in that region. And the second of the border dispute, it's called secession, that it's when a nation or part of a state wants to secede from the state, either to create a new state or to become part of another state. So it would be for you to be independent, that would be to create a new state, or to be part of another state. These two concepts will be explained in a further example. And of course, number two, the control of the entire states. It might refer to the dispute over the control of an entire state or vast area of territory. Its name says it all. Okay, so why does Ukraine matter? As you look here in the map, you see that you have Russia on one side, you have Poland on the other side, and of course in the center you have Ukraine. This little pie right here is Crimea, and it's important for you to take consideration the subject of Ukraine, because what happened in Crimea and early this year in February was a referendum in which the people of Crimea, which are basically Russian in ethnicity, they declared that they wanted to be part of Russia. So Russia, given the fact that this was its territory, created something that could be considered an example of irredentism. They used the referendum to take back the territory of Crimea based on the fact that Russians live there. On the other side, the Crimea people, they wanted to secede from Ukraine, not to be independent, but to be part of Russia. So this is an example in which you can see both of the divisions of border disputes, which would be irredentism and secession. Now moving forward with another example, this is a historical example, and the guy that you see here, his name is Slobodan Milosevic. He used to be the president of Serbia, and in 1992 he had a war towards Bosnia and Herzegovina. Why? Well, because Bosnia and Herzegovina wanted to be independent. And let's remember that all of these states were considered Yugoslavia when it was the Cold War, during the Cold War. So in 1991, countries such as Slovenia, Macedonia, and Croatia, they became independent. So here is Croatia, Macedonia, and Slovenia up here. So they wanted to be independent, and they won their independence. So Bosnia and Herzegovina, they wanted to do the same. But what happened here is that Slobodan Milosevic, being the president of Serbia, they didn't want to let them be independent. So they waged a war for 3 years, from 1992 to 1995. The troops of Milosevic against the people in Bosnia, which are considered Bosniaks, with a SC at the end. These are Muslim population that live in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They wanted to be independent. In other words, they wanted to secede from Serbia, which was called Yugoslavia. but Serbia thought that there were Serbs living in this region, so this territory would never be independent. So they invaded Bosnia-Herzegovina and went to war. This was a massive genocide, so 100,000 people were killed, and the responsible for this genocide was Slobodan Milosevic. At the end, Bosnia-Herzegovina became independent, but it took them years to achieve the secession that ended in independence. Another example of secession and irredentism might be Ireland, who tried to secede from the UK after waging a war of 2-3 years against the British government and its forces. So here you can see in the map that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is the correct name for this land, it's an independent state, but it previously was also controlled the southern part of the Ireland, which is now the Republic of Ireland. So they seceded from Great Britain, and this is an example of how they became independent. They didn't want to become part of another country, like is the case of Crimea, but they want to be independent on their own, which is also compared with what Bosnia-Herzegovina did against Yugoslavia or Serbia in that time. Another example of secession is Chechnya, which is located in the southern part of Russia, more or less very near to Georgia and Azerbaijan. So Chechnya wants to be independent since 1991 too, and they have been waging 2 periods of war, the first Chechen War and the second Chechen War, back in the 90s, because they want to be considered independent. But Russia has not let them and is not going to give them their independence because it's a part of the territory that Russia doesn't want to lose. Another example that is a territorial one, but this one is very weird since it's about an island, some islands that are located in the South China Sea, very close to Vietnam, very close to the Philippines, and of course close to China right here. So they want to be, they are islands that are claimed by these countries, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, and well, Taiwan, but you know that Taiwan is not recognized internationally as a state. So they both claim the territory as theirs, based on the fact that there is an exclusive economic zone of 200 nautical miles. And so all of these countries think that because this is located close to their territory, it should be them. And of course, because they have significant amount of oil and natural gas reserves, it's a territory that it's debated towards who is the owner. Right now, we have military from China, from Vietnam, from the Philippines, and from Malaysia occupying these islands that are more or less 45 islands separated into the sea. Another example of territory is the Falkland Islands or Las Islas Malvinas, which are located very near to Argentina, where you can say that the Falkland Islanders are legally British citizens and they have been British colony or had British rule since the 1833. And in 1982, Argentina went to war against the British Army to try to take over these islands that Argentina claimed at them, that belongs to Argentina. But so far, they surrendered because they lost the war, and the islands still have British administration. So Argentina would try to create irredentism on the Falkland Islands based on the fact that historically it used to belong to Argentina. And at the end, this is what I was telling you about. It's called the exclusive economic zone. And what it says is that given the fact that there is a convention on the law of the sea by the United Nations, it determined that international borders for the sea include 200 nautical miles, which is this amount of kilometers that is considered part of a state. So it includes fishing and mineral rights that you will have for the extraction of what's in the sea. So Russia and Norway in 2010 agreed to divide portions of the Arctic into exclusive economic zones for oil and gas. So this might be a problem in the future, since the Arctic it's proven to have oil reserves and gas reserves, and there are countries like Russia and Norway taking advantage of it and not really respecting the international agreement on EECs. So this is something different, since it's not irredentism, it's not secession, but it's a conflict over territory too. The second type of conflict over interest is governmental, and it refers to how the governments might have strong interests in other states, and they will try to influence who holds power in those states so that they can have these puppet states that they control. So sometimes it might be represented as influencing other states' election, and this is an example clearly the US in Iraq in 2003, where they created a coalition provisional authority just before Saddam Hussein was taken out of the government. And of course what happened recently in Ukraine in 2014, where Russia had a lot to do in the Crimea's referendum back in February this year. And of course the support that the US government, the European Union, and NATO are giving to Ukraine to try to have them on their side too. Obviously there are some interests involved that had a lot to do with oil and gas. Finally, the last of the conflicts of interest are economic conflicts, and this is the most pervasive form of conflict in international relations because economic transactions are pervasive. In other words, it's something that happens every day, and enormous quantities of money is exchanged. So to have an example of an economic conflict, let's suppose that Costa Rica, they want to have their prices up when they export, of course, because they want to have more earnings. But Canada, it imports coffee from Costa Rica, so they want the price to be lower. So it might represent an economic conflict for one country to increase the price, or because it will affect mutual gains. That is defined as states and companies enter economic transactions because they profit from doing so. One of the things that are important here to say is that economic conflicts, they do not involve military force or war, so they are solved most of the times in the World Trade Organization. So, solved in the World Trade Organization. And we could also try to question the fact that maybe drug trafficking might be an economic conflict that is causing a lot of social unrest, political issues, economic issues, and perhaps the fact that the military industry sometimes transfers weapons to states that might be considered hostile. So that might also be part of economic conflict too. Here we can see how Mexico has World Trade Organization issues against all of these countries, and most of the times is because of dumping, which is when a country tries to affect the trade of another country by decreasing the prices. So for you to remember what's important about this presentation is that you have a clear overview that conflicts over interest involve three main categories, and of course the territorial category, which is the biggest one, is divided as well in border disputes and in control of entire states. And inside border disputes you have these two examples, irredentism and secession. So I hope that everything is clear so far, and I'll see you in class. Thank you.